Today, we will talk about one of the most horrifying cases that will send shivers down your spine. Well, let's get to the point. In any sphere of activity, there is a human factor that sometimes turns into a serious problem in certain areas, especially when it comes to public safety. The lives of entire families can be at stake. Up until 2009, Mary Griffiths was a 38-year-old divorced woman raising 3 daughters aged 9, 10, and 13. They were all born in a marriage that, as often happens, turned out to be far from the idealized youthful dreams. The relationship didn't work out, and in 2007 the couple divorced but remained on good terms. Mary got primary custody of the children, and her ex-husband would take them on weekends. There were no disputes between them on this matter. Now she was just trying to move on with her life and striving to provide her girls with everything they needed. The woman worked a lot, looking for good job openings in the city so as not to waste time on long commutes and spend more time with her children. So, Mary got a job as a fitness instructor in a gym not far from her rented housing, and eventually she was even able to buy a house in the small town of Bury Street, Edmonds in the UK. It seemed that things were going well. Mary decided it was worth trying to build a relationship from scratch. Finding a partner shouldn't have been a problem for her, as she looked great, was attractive and was in good physical shape. Thanks to her appearance and active lifestyle, she easily attracted the attention of all the men around her. At some point, John McFarlane became interested in her. They met during a period when they were both looking for work. After getting to talking, they found out that they had a shared interest in martial arts, sports, and similar views on life. Gradually, Mary and John began attending classes together, and then they both got jobs at the fitness center. John also became an instructor. They quickly got along, despite obvious differences. Over time, they began to communicate more and more, becoming friends. It was very convenient. They began to get to work together, have lunch and spend time after the end of the working day together. The man would fill in for Mary when she couldn't come to work, but it was all within the framework of friendly communication. However, the woman was very sociable, so she easily found common ground with anyone. All this time she saw John only as a friend. They spent more and more time together, trained and gradually became close friends. At the same time, Mary had no expectations regarding her buddy. As a man, he did not interest her. The woman sincerely believed that they were just friends. She repeatedly discussed this issue with her family and friends, emphasizing that nothing serious could happen with John. First of all, because he was married. Unfortunately, the man had a completely different opinion on this matter. He believed that Mary's friendliness and her communication with him was a hint that they could be a couple. He fell head over heels in love with the woman, began to idealize what was happening. The heroine's behavior only fueled such fantasies. When John turned 40, she helped organize a party in honor of his milestone birthday. The man took this as something very personal. He saw a reciprocity of feelings in this. It is worth noting that he had always been somewhat withdrawn and had not previously encountered such behavior from women. He had a wife, but the relationship had long cooled down, so such an attitude was very attractive. From the moment of celebrating his 40th birthday, fantasies about a life that Mary Griffiths would be a part of began to weave in his head. This quickly grew into an obsession, despite the fact that he was still married. With friends, he increasingly discussed the possibility of divorce for the sake of Mary. Imagine his surprise and disappointment when, a few months after the start of their friendship, Mary got a boyfriend. The woman had strong feelings for the new man, willingly sharing the details of this relationship with her friend John, not suspecting his inner torment about it. It turned out to be a traumatic experience for him. Discontent grew gradually, but it was not possible to restrain these emotions for long. It all began to pour out into anger and aggression. Angry comments from John began to appear under the posts on the woman's social media page where she talked about her boyfriend. The colleague began to insult her, then accuse her of some far-fetched things. In particular, he accused her of infidelity and a dissolute lifestyle, which clearly did not correspond to reality. John's obsessive ideas and behavior began to turn into real persecution. He intimidated her on the internet, began to regularly make disturbing calls. Gradually Mary noticed that John appeared in any places where she was, although he had no way of knowing about it at all. They became distant and communicated much less. But John didn't like it. The tension continued to grow. He pestered her with calls every day, while his unhealthy behavior began to affect her relationship with her new man. Mary's inner circle did not notice from John's behavior that they were in a relationship, and his beloved had somehow cruelly betrayed him. He was clearly winding himself up about all this, which resulted in constant discontent and aggression. Fortunately, she had not yet crossed the line. Mary repeatedly emphasized that in her understanding they were always just friends. She saw no reason for anything more. Unfortunately, this did not reflect the vision of the inadequate man. His behavior began to cause increasing alarm. Therefore, paranoia gradually developed in the story's heroine. She was worried and afraid to appear in any places of the city, because she knew that John would be there, and she did not want to run into another attack of aggression. She became even more frightened when someone came to her house in the middle of the night, got inside and punctured all 4 wheels on the car. Obviously, she had no other suspicions other than against a colleague at work. Mary guessed that John was trying to drive a wedge into her relationship with her new boyfriend and wants her to be alone. It worked. When the stalker began to write to him too, telling all sorts of fables about Mary, this man did not need problems. In the end, the relationship with her new boyfriend was severed. The woman was very upset, while John, on the contrary, was happy. He believed in himself and decided that now he could freely enter into a relationship with her. He perceived any resistance on her part as a game and flirting. John became so deeply immersed in his inadequate fantasies that as soon as he learned about Mary's breakup, he immediately went to court and filed for divorce from his wife, despite the fact that they had been married for over 2 decades. He was determined to start a new life with a new woman. It all looked especially alarming when Mary found out about it. She did not understand where he was getting the information from at all and what guided him in making decisions. It all really scared the story's heroine, which she often talked about with her family. She was advised to go to the police, but Mary felt sorry for John. She did not want to create problems for him. All this only made the situation worse. John began to constantly call and write to Mary. With every message he spoke about his strongest feelings. How happy he would be if he tied his life to her, claimed that she had feelings that she was hiding. The stalker believed that Mary should openly confess to them so that they could be happy together. Of course, she was not going to do this. Every time, ending the conversation, the woman emphasized that they were just friends, and she was not going to go beyond such a relationship. This calmed him down a bit, but John could no longer stop. It all looked as if John was trying to fit into the concept of a friend, but could not stand it, and every time he tried to penetrate deeper into Mary's life. She rejected any courtship again and again, but did not break off the friendship. In addition to pity, the woman was probably afraid that it would all end in even more persecution. Mary hoped that it would be possible to get through to him. John used every opportunity to be near Mary, came to her house, and every time she let him in. At such moments, he tried to get closer, for example, to kiss when they were sitting on the couch together. The story's heroine refused every time, but he made similar attempts again and again. She wanted to stop the visits, but by this point, the man had resorted to cunning and gotten close to her daughters. He had a great time with them. They even began to ask when John would come next. He spent all his free time with Mary and the children. After the divorce, it seemed that he was just waiting to be invited to move in. At the same time, the relationship with Mary's former boyfriend had not completely ended. Both had doubts and assumed that they would get back together. The whole point of the doubts boiled down to John's behavior. They still thought they were right for each other. When the inadequate buddy saw them together, it caused anger and provoked a new outburst of aggression every time. In one of these cases, he became enraged and lost control of himself. Mary continued to insist, and John blamed her for all his failures regarding the relationship that was not working out. After that, the woman asked her ex-boyfriend to visit her at home more often so that she and the children would feel safe at least at these moments. When the stalker realized what had happened, he reacted inadequately again and began to make posts on his social media page, allegedly proving that he was in a relationship with Mary Griffiths. She decided that it was time to break the vicious circle, so she left a comment under this post, clearly indicating that there could be nothing between them. In such a situation, it would be logical to leave the woman alone and continue with his life, try to restore the relationship with his ex-wife, but instead the madman came to Mary's house again. He managed to persuade her to let him inside by playing on pity. She not only allowed him to enter, but also to stay the night and even sleep on the couch. The weather was bad outside, the compassionate Mary could not leave John, whom she still considered a friend, on the street. He played on pity, reminding her again about the breakup with his wife, who had kicked him out of the house. It was assumed that he would spend the night on the sofa, and then in the morning, when the children went to school, they would discuss the relationship and dot all the I's. Obviously, for John it was just a trick. That same night he tried to seduce Mary. As she personally believed, at night the man stood in the doorway and watched her sleep. At that time, her younger daughter was in her bed, who was afraid to stay in the room alone. Mary woke up from the unhealthy gaze, began to drive the man away, the children woke up, and it all poured out into another wave of indignation. John accused his friend that she gives false hopes, and then destroys them, deliberately getting pleasure from it. After that, the man left, but from that moment the madness began to look even more alarming. John posted posts on his social media pages with death, depressing content, clearly hinting that he could take his own life. He told many of his friends about the same thing. Once he even took an eerie photo where he stands next to a rope in the barn, as if he was going to carry out the threats. Then there were several incidents that confirmed the worst fears. The man swallowed sleeping pills, and twice with a short interval. Both times it was necessary to seek medical services. On May 3, 2009, it went so far that Mary herself insisted that John go to a psychiatrist. Against the background of frightening behavior, the man's friends, even his ex-wife, thought the same. But the specialist could not diagnose him with any disorders and gave the conclusion that he was not a threat to himself or to society. This mistake became the first in a chain of tragic coincidences that could not end well. During this period, the story's hero worked part-time on a farm for a 60-year-old woman named Cecilia. She was also a witness to all these sufferings of John related to the romantic sphere. She saw his indignation about the doctor's conclusion. Probably, the man was aware of the problems he faced, so he was upset that they were not going to treat him and leave him in a psychiatric clinic. Of course, this also frightened Mary. She felt in danger, feared for the girls, but found herself powerless in the face of this threat. On May 5, 2009, the worst fears began to come true. On this day, around 6 p.m., Mary contacted the 999 emergency service. The woman told the operator that her friend John McFarlane had gone crazy. She was scared, she didn't know what to do because of his behavior. Mary talked about the harassment, his inadequate actions and attempts to voluntarily take his life, which he informed her about. After analyzing the content of the statements, the operator concluded that this was not an emergency call that could be responded to over a long period of time, from 1 to 4 hours. In addition, all law enforcement officers were busy, so Mary was later told that the police officer would only be able to come to her the next morning. The frightened woman was told that in case of aggravation of the situation, she should contact the rescue service again, and then they would come to her earlier. In fact, Mary had good reason to contact the 999 service, as John attacked her for the first time, taking advantage of a leg injury she received. During the day, she went to the hospital, and when she returned home, of course, the stalker was already waiting for her. He was always there to support her, to convince her that she needed him. But as soon as the opportunity presented itself, the inadequate buddy took advantage of it. She complained to her unrealized boyfriend that John had taken advantage of this situation, her vulnerability. Impunity reached the point of sexual harassment. With even greater difficulty she managed to stop him. The situation was so tense that when the mother was putting the girls to bed, the girls were seriously afraid that John might come back and they would never see their mother again. The stalker was driven away, but he was furious. He sent Mary a threatening message, considered himself rejected and wanted revenge. Everyone who knew Mary well was worried. They even turned to the police with similar questions. For example, her friend called the rescue service around 6:30 p.m. the same day. She also stated that she was worried about John's mental state, as his behavior had gotten out of control. The man was inadequate and dangerous, but the friend was simply ignored, not even comparing it with Mary's call. Much later, another appeal arrived, which John himself made. Closer to midnight, he reported a robbery and made sure that the police officers on duty responded to his call. He used this cover and headed to the house of the woman who had allegedly rejected him. Before that, he wrote to his wife that he still loved her, accused her of all the problems and the breakup of relations with Mary. He said that he decided to deal with it once and for all. Leaving this ambiguous text, the man took an axe and a special gun for slaughtering livestock. After that, he headed towards Mary Griffiths' house. She was resting with her children at the time, unaware of the danger. Around 2:40 a.m., the man was already standing at her back door and used an axe to get inside. Then he threw the tool in the kitchen, turned off the electricity in the whole house, got to the fuse box. He knew its location thanks to previous visits. When he began to climb the stairs to the second floor, Mary woke up. Here the woman was resting with her 10-year-old daughter. Hearing someone enter the room, she tried to turn on the light. She realized with horror that it was not working. She realized that there was only one person who could be in the house without an invitation. The woman did not have time to react. John attacked, began to beat and dragged her from the bed to the floor of the room. John pounced on Mary, began to strangle her. All the girls woke up from the noise. They tried to resist the man, but the athletic John was clearly stronger than them. He wounded 2 of the children with a gun. He also shot at Mary. He wanted to hit her in the chest, but she dodged and was wounded in the shoulder. All this led to a desperate struggle for life. Mary resisted with all her strength, but due to the injury she could not do it fully. She realized that she needed to get out into the street. In the hope of leading the man away from the children, as well as calling for help. The girls at this time could no longer resist because of their injuries. Therefore, they just cried and shouted for John not to harm them and their mother. Strangling Mary Griffiths failed. The wounded woman tried to get to the front door, went down the stairs and ran out into the street with shouts. In the end, all this noise attracted the neighbors. People began to come out to see what was happening. Several witnesses with their own eyes saw the gun for slaughtering livestock, which the killer aimed at the chest of the frightened victim. In front of all those present, including the children, he fired twice. Among Mary's neighbors was a policeman who was not on duty at the time, but was resting at home. The man approached John, trying to calm him down and talk to him. The criminal without hesitation aimed the weapon at him and announced that he would shoot. The policeman was unarmed, so he raised his hands and backed away. This probably saved his life. After that, the madman hit Mary's youngest daughter and fled the crime scene. Among the neighbors were medical workers who tried to provide assistance to the woman while waiting for the ambulance. Unfortunately, they could no longer help her. The 38-year-old woman died. 2 of her daughters needed medical help at the hospital. Overall, they were not seriously injured, at least physically. In fact, events did not unfold according to the scariest scenario. It was later established that initially the plan did not involve the murder of Mary and her children. But everything did not go according to plan. Then he was going to voluntarily take his own life right in her house, to force the woman to live with this pain. This is what he told his friend in a messenger. The madman believed that this was an adequate revenge for Mary breaking his heart. Unfortunately, the friend did not take these words seriously. Therefore, he did not even try to stop him. He simply advised John to return to his wife and calm down. It turned out that after shooting at Mary, John immediately wrote to the same friend about what he had done. In the fresh tracks in the garden of the house where the inadequate man had lived for the last few weeks, he was found bloody. As soon as he returned here, he immediately tried to voluntarily take his own life by cutting his wrists. He was saved. When John came to his senses, he began to refer to memory lapses. According to him, he remembered his numerous attempts to voluntarily depart from life, including the last one committed before the arrest. The man also told the police a story about the alleged relationship with the story's heroine, how she rejected and betrayed him. He remembered fragments of the struggle and the shots, but the main part of the memories turned out to be lost. It seemed to resemble a state of passion. But the detectives were sure that the attacker was just trying to avoid responsibility by referring to mental problems. This was indicated by the fact that he planned the crime, described everything to his friend, said goodbye to his ex-wife and even called the police in advance to distract law enforcement officers. He wanted to get more time before their arrival. In addition, he took a gun from the farm where he worked in addition to the fitness center in advance. It all looked like conscious behavior that is not typical of people with mental disorders. The killer's defender predictably focused on mental disorders and a difficult childhood that the man faced. He was sent for a psychiatric examination, which recognized that John was suffering from a severe form of depressive disorder. He himself did not admit his guilt, continued to insist that he did not remember anything. The prosecution planned to fight in court to obtain punishment for intentional murder. However, this was not necessary. Having weighed all the pros and cons, the lawyer recommended taking responsibility. John changed his testimony, admitted guilt in manslaughter, but continued to insist that he did not remember most of the events. For the victim's family, the admission was a great relief. Nevertheless, the Griffiths were still forced to go through the hearing and find out how frightening Mary's last minutes of life were. Based on their results, the criminal was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 20 years. Usually, for such charges, parole becomes available no earlier than after 30 years of imprisonment. However, the court took into account certain mental health problems that were confirmed during the examination. Mary's relatives were angry that the court recognized the presence of mental problems as a mitigating circumstance and reduced the minimum term of imprisonment to 20 years. Of course, the Griffiths family disagreed with this decision. They believed that John deserved a much more severe punishment, because he not only killed Mary, but could have killed the children, wounded them, and in general is dangerous to society. In their opinion, John should be isolated until the end of his days. Relatives not only became convinced of the need for more severe punishment when they fully delved into the crazy ideas of this person. It was confirmed that he planned to first deal with the children. And somehow at the last moment he changed his mind, focusing on the murder of Mary. Perhaps because Mary entered into a desperate struggle with him and led him away from the house, away from the children, at the cost of her own life. In addition, the bloody execution took place in front of the children, the youngest of whom was 10 years old. The girls were frightened, shocked, and rehabilitated from the experience with great difficulty. Due to John's mental disorders, there was increased control over him in prison, associated with a high probability of an attempt to voluntarily depart from life. The indignation of the victims' relatives led to the fact that the prosecutor's office itself decided to revise the court's decision and filed an appeal. Thanks to these efforts, it was possible to achieve a review. The minimum term of 20 years was increased to the standard 30. After the victory at the repeated hearings, the senior investigator in this case turned to the Griffiths family and said that he hoped that the revision of the decision and the increase in the term would bring more consolation. The story did not end there. As it turned out, the children and relatives felt that justice had triumphed. When the youngest of them, named Sophia, turned 18, Hannah was 19, and Jessica was 22, together they decided to seek punishment for all the people they considered involved in John's attack. They blamed the police department for this, in particular the dispatcher, as well as the psychiatrist who found John sane and did not send him for compulsory treatment in a psychiatric clinic. The girls believed that if these people had fully assessed the threat posed by the stalker, Mary would still be alive. It all made sense, because even a cursory communication with the psychiatrist who analyzed the killer's state of health after the arrest was enough to identify the disorder. Serious mental disorders were simply ignored. Why 2 tests conducted in the hospital did not show similar problems remained unclear. Obviously, the response to Mary's call, as well as her friends', which took place with an interval of only half an hour, was not enough. The operator incorrectly assessed the threat. According to the sisters, this was the only reason why the police did not react in time and did not prevent the bloody execution. All this led to a revision of the regulations aimed at promptly identifying threats, as well as counteracting them. Regarding the actions of the police, it was decided that the law enforcement officers did everything correctly within the framework of the regulations. However, Sophia, Hannah and Jessica do not lose hope that their efforts were not in vain, and this will at least help save the lives of other victims. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.